the fact that it was just, oh, well, I can't do it because it's school night, it's going to interfere with school, just shows how kind of trivial in many, many ways they considered the taking of another person's life. It was just a matter of fact, as if they'd just been eliminating somebody from a list of historical figures that they were collecting, obsessing about.
The papers this morning are filled with photographs of Brianna Ghey and the incredibly powerful words of her mother, Esther, who said outside court after the two guilty murder verdicts yesterday that any sympathy she might have had for her daughter's killers vanished after the pair showed not 1 ounce of remorse. Brianna was 16, her killers were both 15 at the time, and their court-ordered anonymity is going to be challenged in court today. We'll get a decision about that at some point. In a moment, we'll hear from a criminal psychologist. First, let's turn to Charlotte Nichols, who's the MP for Warrington North, where Brianna lived. She's live with us. Charlotte, hello.
Good morning.
And there'll be lots of parents, young people, especially young trans people, particularly shaken by the awful detail of what happened that we heard in court over the weeks of hearings. What do you think about anything that can be done to actually help ease them?
Well, one of the first things that we established very early on was a commitment from the Prime Minister around financial support for the school, for some of the additional pastoral support that the students were clearly going to need in terms of trying to navigate the time between the murder and the trial, which has obviously played out in the national and international media spotlight. But we've also been working, Brianna's mum, Esther, who you referenced there, has established a campaign called Peace in Mind, which has been about mindfulness education in schools. It's already raised over £33,000. We've had 21 schools across Warrington take part in the initial training, and it's something that we're hoping can be rolled out nationwide because it's a really critical time for young people's mental health. But it's something that has come up throughout the trial, not just in terms of Brianna's vulnerabilities, the perpetrator's mental health, but also the mental health impact on the community dealing with this tragedy.
Yeah, and incredible that Esther Ghey has been able to do all of that in the wake of such awful grief that she must be feeling. What did you make of what she had to say outside court yesterday? Such incredible strength, and also incredible that she, said that we should remember that the parents of the two killers as well, because they too have lost children in one respect.
Yeah, I mean, Esther is probably the most remarkable woman I've ever met over the course of what's happened, and I would have really hoped to have met her in different circumstances. We've had a number of conversations, and as you said, that compassion, that empathy that she has is something that's shone through all of the way. I think from very early on, as she said herself, a lot of that compassion was towards the perpetrators. But even on the steps of court on the day that they've been convicted of the murder of her child, she's calling for compassion and empathy towards those children's parents. I mean, that's remarkable, and I think shows a real strength of character and a real love that she has, that I think all of us are very lucky who've come across her to know she's incredible.
Just finally, the last time anything like this happened was, of course, the murder of James Bulger. At the time, we had photographs of the two young children who killed him and their names. They went on to have different identities after the court hearing, after the sentencing. The judge in this case is going to decide later today whether to reveal the names of the killers in this case. Should we know who they are?
I mean, it's not something that I personally take a particular view on. Certainly within our community, it's very well known who they are, not least because they haven't been at school since this happened.
Yeah.
People in the community that were witnesses to elements of the crime, for example. But in terms of the wider public interest, I think that's a decision for the judge and not for me.
Charlotte, thank you. Charlotte Nichols, the MP for Warrington North.
Let's also speak to Dr David Holmes, a criminal psychologist at Manchester Metropolitan University. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
The first thing to say, of course, is that this is a very rare occurrence, that children rarely kill other children. But
extremely rare.
Yes. Yeah. What would you add to this, your observations about this terrible case?
It's obviously tragic. It's obviously something that doesn't happen every day at all. In this particular case, you do have factors that would probably have lent themselves towards the crime actually occurring. Both of the killers had autistic traits, quite strong autistic traits. And 99%, of course, of autistic people become obsessed with something, usually impersonal, usually obscure, usually absolutely and totally harmless. In this case, unfortunately, it was autism gone wrong. They become obsessed, or the girl certainly became very obsessed and actively obsessed with torture and killing. And they went through large numbers of people that they thought that they could kill actively and made complex plots and reasons for doing it and reasons for not doing it, etc., etc., and eventually came up with a really, really complicated plot to do it. Here you have where the autistic traits come into play is, of course, they do tend to lack empathy. They tend to make very complicated plans, become very obsessed with it. They are withdrawn from other people, tend to be socially shy, and don't communicate with others. So they don't kind of like rationalize what they're doing is completely wrong. They tend to be very insular and obviously be having the support of each other. X and Y, had this kind of support mechanism which enabled them to actually stride through this. But, of course, alongside this, with sort of autistic traits and often in crimes involving autistic individuals, they have a lack of social insight into what they're doing. Clearly, the seriousness of what they're doing, but the social insight into how other people would view it and how other people would view the way that they explained it. They assumed, of course, that everything that they said, the complex explanations, would be just accepted, whereas, of course, people just see through it straight away.
There is a detail within the text that were released about one of them saying that they didn't want to commit the crime on that particular day because it was a school night, and I suppose that underlines the kind of dispassionate nature of these individuals.
Yes, it clearly, the fact that it was just, I can't do it because it's school night, it's going to interfere with school, just shows how kind of trivial in many, many ways they considered the taking of another person's life. It was just a matter of fact, as if they'd just been eliminating somebody from a list of historical figures that they were collecting, obsessing about.
Just one final point here, the role of the internet here, that the so-called dark web. Is there any kind of policy issue here, anything that the government can do when it comes to what people can view and how it might affect them?
It's has been over time almost impossible to prevent people from accessing the dark web as such. And there are various, I think she used something called an onion router, Girl X, in order to explore this. And they will access stuff if it's there. Having it taken down is almost impossible because you've got there's a whole world. It's not just our country. So it is very, very difficult indeed to police and to stop young people accessing this. I'm very much in favour of being selective, but then again, someone has to decide what you select, and maybe it is quite reasonable that young people should access true crime information, for instance, for some studies. So it becomes very, very blurred, very difficult to actually prevent children from accessing material that could incite, could actually give them a plan, could actually make them think that this could even be normal.
Okay, David, thank you. It's Dr David Holmes. He's a criminal psychologist at Manchester Metropolitan University.